Hi, so today we are going to learn a new lesson. This is a new video. I'm not sure what happened and why everything was so tiny on the last one. So we are going to go ahead and kind of redo it. So the first thing I want you guys to do is go ahead and complete these 4 problems, okay? So this is just a warm-up, and we have already done this about 3 or 4 times, so you're going to go ahead and simplify those go ahead and simplify those radicals, okay? And what I mean by simplify is we have to try and find square roots, right, and perfect squares. 120 is not a square root. It's not a perfect square, so we have to go ahead and simplify that. So go ahead and try that. I'm going to go ahead and write down all the perfect squares on the right side right now. As you can see, I'm doing that, okay? So go ahead and try and complete that. Please pause this video and then come back when you are done, okay? Okay, so now that you are back and you have completed these 4 problems, we're going to go ahead and break things down. So I am breaking down the square root of 120, okay? And 2 numbers that I can use. I need to find one being a perfect square and one not, okay? So the 2 numbers I'm going to use are 4 and 30. So we're going to break it down to 4 times 30, break it down again, and my final answer is 2 square root of 30. Okay, number 2, the square root of 10, that is in its simplest form. There is no factor of 10 that is a perfect square. So I'm just going to leave my answer as the square root of 10. Okay? I'm then going to move on to number 3. So here we are working on the square root of 64. And the square root of 64, that 64 is a perfect square, so my answer is just 8. Okay? And then lastly, the square root of 200. 2 numbers that I can use are 2 times 100. I'm going to break it down again. Okay? And now my final answer is 10 square root of 2. Okay, so that's how you complete those top first 4. So we're going to be using simplifying radicals in our lesson today. So that's important to just kind of get the hang of and get used to, because we're going to be using that again, okay? So we are not going to worry about these, okay? So I'm just going to cancel them out. We are not going to worry about those, okay? Now I'm going to scroll down, okay? Now, this is the most important part of our lesson today, and we are learning quadratic formula. So I want everybody to go ahead and write this down, okay? I want you to write quadratic formula, and then I want you to write the whole formula down, where it says x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, so pause this video and write this down on a piece of paper or on Cami, wherever you're taking your notes. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and go on to the next page now that we have the quadratic formula down. Okay, that's what we're going to be using. We use the quadratic formula when we are looking at quadratic functions and see that they're a little harder. So when we're looking here, we would never factor that. Okay, that's too hard. We have too big of numbers, we have decimals, too much. So what we're going to do is we are going to use the quadratic formula. Okay, so on this next page, we are going to go over some examples, okay? We need to write one more thing down before we do that, and this is in bolded print right here, okay? We cannot use the quadratic formula unless we are in standard form and it is equal to 0, okay? So it has to be in standard form and it has to be equal to 0, okay? So go ahead and write that down. If you need to, pause this video, and then you can come right back, okay? So I am looking at number 1, okay? Now, number 1, I realize that it is not in standard form and it is not set equal to 0. This problem is set equal to 11. So we need to do something to get this to set equal to 0. So the first thing I'm going to do, my first step, so I'm going to write some steps down to the right, okay? My first step is to set equal to 0. And how I will do that is I'm going to subtract 11 from both sides. Okay, so now I have x squared minus 10x minus 11 equals 0. Okay, now this 11 and this 10x and this x squared, none of those are like terms, so I'm just going to write it in a row. Okay, so now that we have this set, Now we are in standard form and we are set equal to 0, okay? So that was step 1. Step 2, now that we're there, we can write down the quad formula, okay? And I want you to write down the quad formula every single time we do a problem. So x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, so we're writing down that quad formula every single time. Then step 3 is then to label a, b, and c. Okay, so like when we were factoring back a couple weeks ago, we are going to label a, b, and c. Okay, in this case, a is 1, b is negative 10, and c is negative 11. So we are looking at our standard form quadratic function to find a, b, and c. We are looking at that arrow, okay? So we have labeled a, b, and c. Now, step 4 is then to plug a, b, and c into the quad formula, okay? So we are plugging that back into the quad formula, okay? So now I'm going to go ahead and every time I see when I'm plugging something in, I need to use parentheses. So what I mean by that is I'm going to have x equals negative. That's in the formula already. Then I'm going to draw parentheses, and I'm going to add in whatever my b is. So in this case, it's negative 10. Then plus or minus. Now here, again, I'm putting parentheses, negative 10 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 11. So see, every time I'm plugging something in, I'm using parentheses. Then 2 times 1, because that's 2 times a, okay? So that is step 4. Step 5 is then to simplify the quad form. Okay, and what I mean by simplify is we are just going to multiply and square and do whatever we need to do to simplify this up, okay? So x equals. Now, we are simplifying this term right here. Now, remember, there's technically a negative 1 in front of that parentheses. So negative 1 times negative 10 gives me a positive 10. So that's my first simplification. Then I'm going to keep going, plus or minus. Now, I need to simplify what's under the radical. So negative 10 squared is 100. Then what I need to do is I need to multiply this whole thing together. So negative 4 times 1 gives me negative 4. And then negative 4 times negative 11 gives me a positive 44. Okay, and then all over 2 because 2 times 1 is 2. All right, so now that we have simplified, that's simplifying the quad form. Okay, step 6 is to simplify the radical. So we are going to look at all the work under the radical. Okay, so that is here. We are looking at this radical. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and simplify that. So I'm keeping x equals 10 plus or minus the square root of 144, because 100 plus 44 gives me 144, all over 2 still. Okay, now I'm still not done. I still have to continue to simplify that radical. Now, I'm going to do the same thing, x equals 10 plus or minus. Now, the square root of 144 is 12, okay? That's a perfect square, so I can just write the square down, okay? Now, it may look like we are done, okay? But this plus or minus tells us something, okay? We're going to get 2 answers. So what I need to do is I need to break this down, this whole equation down into 2 different answers. Okay, and here I have x equals,
hi guys. Hello.
Equals 10 plus 12 all over 2. And then on the bottom, we have x equals 10 minus 12 all over 2. So now that we've broken it up into 2 different equations, we can go ahead and solve. So in this first one, we are going to simplify the top, add 10 plus 12, which gives me 22 over 2, and my final answer is x equals 11. So that's the answer, first answer for this problem. And then the second one, we are going to go ahead and simplify that. 10 minus 12 is negative 2, all over negative 2, and x equals negative 1. So that is our second answer for that problem, okay? So I am going to erase this a little bit so I can go on to number 2. Or I'll just write it over here. But please write those steps down, okay? Step 7, after we simplify the radical, will just be to solve for x. Okay? And you're always going to get 2 answers. Okay? All right, let's go ahead and do number 2, okay? I'm just going to come over here and do it on this side, okay? Just so I have more room. So step 1 is to set this equal to 0. If this is set equal to 0, which it is, we can go ahead and write the quadratic formula down. Remember, I want you guys to memorize this by heart. You may be having a quiz on it where you just have to give me the quadratic formula, and you will not have notes, okay? So step 2 was to write down the quadratic formula. Step 3 is then to label A, B, and C. So in this case, A is 2, B is 25, and C is 33, okay? So I'm now just going to go ahead and plug my numbers into the quadratic formula. So x equals, now remember to keep your parentheses. Whenever we're plugging something in, we're using parentheses, okay? So negative, and then 25 in parentheses, plus or minus, in parentheses, 25 squared minus 4 times 2 times 33 all over 2 times 2. Okay, so now that we are here, that was my step 3. Step 4 is then to go ahead and simplify everything out, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and simplify. So x equals, now this term becomes negative 25 plus or minus. Now, 25 squared is 625, okay? And negative 4 times 2 times 33 gives me a negative 264, and then all over 4, okay? So now that we have simplified the quadratic formula, we need to go ahead and simplify this radical, okay? So what we're going to have is x equals negative 25 plus or minus. Now, 625 minus 264 gives me a 361, okay? All keeping it over 4. All right? Then what we need to do is we need to go ahead and see if 361 is a perfect square. In this case it is, okay? The square root of 361 is 19, okay? Because we were simplifying this again, and it's 19. Now, just like the last one, because we have a plus or minus here, we need to break this down into 2 equations and solve. So on this top one, it's going to say x equals negative 25 plus 19 all over 4. And the bottom is going to say x equals negative 25 minus 19 all over 4. Okay? And then what we're going to do is we're just going to simplify that. So simplifying the top, x equals negative 25 plus 19 is negative 6 all over 4, which can then simplify as x equals negative 3 over 2. And that will be answer 1. Now we'll simplify on the bottom as well. Negative 25 minus 19 is negative 44 all over 4, and that simplifies to negative 11, and that is your second answer. Okay? So that's how you complete number 2. If you need to pause and go back, go ahead and do so, okay? Oh. Let's see, why is this not sticking? All right, so I'm going to have to erase that, unfortunately. Okay? Sorry about that, guys. Let me go ahead and erase that. That was your answer, so make sure you, if you have to reverse, go back and watch it over again, okay? So now we are on number 3 and 4. Now these are a little different because when we start to simplify that radical is not going to be a perfect square. We're going to have to do a few steps to simplify it, okay? So my first step still is to see if this is in standard form and set equal to 0, okay? So this is already set equal to 0, so that first step is complete. So what I can do is go ahead and write down the quadratic formula. So x equals negative b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay? So that's step 2. Step 3 is then to label a, b, and c. Okay, so I'm looking at this function, and we are labeling. So a equals 8, b equals 4, and c equals negative 21. Okay? My next step is then to plug that into the quad formula. So x equals, now remember, parentheses are important, negative 4 plus or minus 4 squared minus 4 times 8 times negative 21 all over 2 times 8. Okay? So we have plugged back in. Okay? And now what I need to do is I need to go ahead and simplify. Okay? So I now have x equals, this term becomes negative 4 plus or minus 4 squared gives me 16. And then I need to do this term. So negative 4 times 8 times negative 21 gives me a positive 672. And then I can't forget to do this bottom term, which gives me 16. Okay? So that step is complete. My next step is then to simplify this radical. So I'm focusing on that radical, okay? Everything else is staying the same. So x equals negative 4 plus or minus. Now, 16 plus 672 gives me 688, okay? All over 16. Now, this is where we're going different because the square root of 688 is not a thing. We cannot take the square root of 688. So what we need to do is we need to simplify that, okay? So, again, I'm going to write down the perfect squares. Okay. So those are the perfect squares we're going to focus on, okay? And we need to take 680, okay? 688, I'm sorry. And we need to find two factors that multiply to give me 688, with one of them being a perfect square, okay? So if you do not know how to do that, you are going to take 688 and you are going to divide it by each of these perfect squares. And we are looking for the biggest perfect square that fits into 688, okay? And in this case, it is 16 times 43, okay? So now what we're going to do is we are going to plug this back into our simplified radical, okay? Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say x equals negative 4 plus or minus. Now I'm taking the terms that we chose and plugging them back into our quad formula. Okay, so I'm going to write them in black. The square root of 16 times the square root of 43, and it's still over 16. Okay, so now we are getting this into its simplest root. So all of my red stays the same. Okay, and now I'm going to go ahead and simplify this part right here. And the square root of 16 is 4. And then 43 is a prime number, so it cannot be simplified into anything else. Okay? So we want to say this is our end answer, but because we have this plus or minus here, we need to break it into two separate answers. Okay? So my top answer is going to say x equals negative 4 plus 4 square root of 43 all over 16. And my bottom answer is going to say x equals negative 4 minus 4 square root of 43 all over 16. Okay? These can be simplified, and we are going to work on that next time I see you. Okay? So you are going to use this same idea. Okay? All right? So go ahead, and if you need to pause this and write something down, go ahead. But I'm going to go ahead and move on to number 4. Okay, number 4 is the last one I'm going to be doing with you, and you are going to go do 2 on your own homework, okay? So, this is not in standard form, so the first thing I need to do is get this into standard form and set equal to 0. So, I am going to subtract 12x from both sides, okay? And I am left with 10x squared minus 12x minus 14 equals 0. Now notice none of these terms here are like terms, so I'm just going to write it in a row, okay? So now So now I am in standard form, and this is set equal to 0. So step 1 is complete. I am then going to go ahead and start to complete step 2, which is to write down the quadratic formula. So x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, now I'm going to use this formula here, this function here that I have just put an arrow next to, and label my a, b, and c. So a is 10, b is negative 12, and c is negative 14. And once I've done that, I can go ahead and plug into my quadratic formula. Make sure we're using parentheses. That's super, super important, okay? Everywhere you're adding a number, you're filling in a number, you are using a parenthesis around that, okay? So I have then completed me plugging back in, okay? So I'm going to give everybody a couple seconds. And then once you have plugged everything back in, you can go ahead and start to simplify. So go ahead and start your basic math. Most of it is just multiplication, okay? So I am looking at this term. This now becomes a positive 12, plus or minus, okay? 144, because negative 12 squared is 144, okay? Plus 560, because negative 4 times 10 times negative 14 gives me a 560, all over 20. Okay? So now I've simplified the quad form, so now I need to go ahead and simplify the radical. Okay, so I'm just going to add 140, right now I'm just adding 144 plus 560. Okay, so x equals, everything else is staying the same. And 144 plus 560 gives me 704. Okay, so I still need to go ahead and try and simplify this radical. So we are going to do the same thing. We need to find a perfect square. So 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, 49, 64, 81, 100, 121, and 144. We are going to take 704 and we are going to divide it by each of these perfect squares and see which one fits evenly, okay? And the two factors that I'm going to choose are 64 and 11, okay, with 64 being a perfect square. So now that I have chosen the new two factors, I'm going to go ahead and simplify those in. And I'm going to take my square root of 64 and my square root of 11 and write them in black so you can see where I substituted in, okay? Then we just need to keep going and simplify this step one more time, okay? Now all the red stays the same. Now here, the square root of 64 is 8, and then 11 is going to stay there because that's its simplest form, okay? Now, this is as simple as we can get, but there is a plus minus. So now I need to break it up into two answers, okay? So x equals 12 plus 8 square root of 11 over 20, and x equals 12 minus 8 square root of 11 all over 20. And those are your two answers, okay? So you are not breaking your answer down into two answers until you get into the simplest form with your radical, okay? All right, so I have completed these 4 problems with you. All right, so what I want you to do is go on the next page, okay? And you are going to complete these 2 for homework, all right? Please use Kami to complete them. And when you're done, you're just going to press turn in. This won't be due until the next time I see you, okay? All right, if you have any questions, let me know.